Remember what the Fed's been doing for the past 14 months. They've been raising interest rates. Yeah, we know that. But they've also been reducing their balance sheet. I run into people all the time. They bang the table. Hey, the Fed's got to stop printing money. They're printing too much money. They've been burning money. They've been reducing the base money supply for over a year, about a year and a half. Well, now, okay, so the base money supply is coming down. Rates are coming up. But what does it mean if $1 trillion worth of bonds show up and the banks delivering the bonds say, give us the cash? Where does the cash come from? The Fed prints it. So now you're going to expand base money by perhaps $1 trillion or more at a time when you've been pretending to reduce base money. So this completely blows up their monetary tightening. Okay, they're not cutting interest rates. That we'll see what happens there, but they are increasing the money supply by, again, estimate upwards of $1 trillion. So what happened to your inflation fighting? What happened to your monetary tightening? And they just want to pretend. I mean, you do have to be expert to understand all these mechanics, but they're not that hard to explain. I mean, you can just say it in plain English, which is what we're doing. But from a policy point of view, it completely blows up their monetary tightening. The universe of people who really understand this, certain lawyers, certain regulators, certain analysts, just experts, because that's what they do, is pretty small. But the overlap between that group who really get it and the group who have an interest in making sure no one else understands it is large, meaning they're all in on it. The number of people who really get it, they can raise their hand and say, I'm an expert in federal finance, government securities and repo and off-balance sheet accounting and all that. And I think you're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. That's like a handful. I mean, and I'm one of them. There are others, glad to say, but and that's the other thing that really I just have low tolerance for, just the lies. If you have to do what you have to do, you don't want the whole system to collapse. I understand that. But you can be honest with people about it. One thing I really like about Britain is the British are really good at stepping up. They resign. If you've done very badly, you're a minister or head of something and just things go badly on your watch, even if it arguably wasn't from, they resign. So I'll just resign. And Japanese do too. And someone takes their place. In America, we act like nothing's wrong. Nobody resigns. Nobody takes responsibility. I mean, I would have said Jay Powell, Michael Barr, who's the vice chairman of the Federal Reserve for supervision. So he's the guy who wears the regulatory hat. Powell's the chairman. And Mary Daly, who's the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Why haven't all three of them resigned or been fired? This was not arcane, but this was simple. These were 97% uninsured deposits ready to run out the door with massive bond losses. They were in 30-year bonds, 10-year notes to 30-year bonds. It wasn't like you had treasury bills. So you can always sell a treasury bill and maybe take a little hickey, but not really. So you can have a government security, which is a treasury, almost no credit risk. I won't say none, but almost no credit risk. But there's always market risk. But the thing about treasury bills, 3-month bills or 6-month bills, there's very little market risk. They're not volatile. But when you're into 30-year bonds, forget it. I mean, you can take 20-point hits when you get the kind of interest rates we say, and that's what they had. And they put them in this held to maturity account, HTM, held to maturity. Yeah, we own them, but we're going to hold them for 30 years. And so therefore, you don't have to mark them to market, except if you sell them. If you sell one, because you got a run on the bank, you got to mark them all to market right then. And that's what this Fed facility was about. The CEO sold over $3 million worth of stock about 10 days before the collapse. Now he says, it was according to a pre-filed plan with the SEC, so it wasn't in response to any news or whatever. What do you have to understand? And there are such things, but these pre-filed plans can be part of the scam. In other words, I see it coming, so I'm going to file a plan so I can keep selling my stock. And then if I get accused of insider trading, I'll go, oh, it was all according to plan. Well, who's to say that the plan wasn't part of the scam? And that's the kind of stuff that was going on. The CFO sold a lot of stock. So that's certainly going to be investigated. But you can see this coming. But my point is, a bright high school kid with a spreadsheet could have seen this coming. You don't have to know Black Scholes in your sleep to see this. It was assets, liabilities, huge uninsured deposits, about $125 billion of uninsured deposits ready to flee, and a comparable amount, slightly more, of the most volatile. Government securities, okay, but extremely volatile, not that liquid in a crisis. That's all you had to look at. So where were the regulators? Where were the supervisors? And they said, well, we sent them a bunch of letters, and they tried out the letters as if that was exculpatory in terms of their regulatory incompetence. It wasn't. If anything, it made it worse, because like, oh, okay, you actually knew about it and didn't do anything. It'd be one thing if you never went over and knocked on the door, but you did. You saw something extremely risky. You sent them a letter and then didn't do anything. It's amazing how Washington works. Mary Daly, I mentioned her. She's president of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. She was on the short list to be nominated to the Board of Governors in Washington to fill the seat that Lael Brainerd left. Lael Brainerd was member of the Board of Governors. I believe she was vice chairman, but she left to go to the White House in the National Economic Council. She really is smart. She's a big brain. She knows what she's talking about. Very few of them do, but she's one of them. But she goes to the White House, but that's an audition for Secretary of the Treasury, because they're going to throw Yellen under the bus. Yellen knows nothing. If Yellen were on this call right now, she wouldn't know anything we're talking about. When she was chairman of the Fed, I said she was incompetent, and I was right. And then she became Secretary of the Treasury. She's a statistics geek from Berkeley. She's got a big brain. I'll give her credit on IQ points. So what? That's not the same as common sense or working knowledge or knowing how the street works. She's never worked, outside of government in her entire life. I don't care what your resume is. If you've never run a business, met a payroll, negotiated a purchase sale agreement, kept your morale up with negative cash flow. If you've never done any of those things, you don't know what it's like to be in the real world of the economy. She doesn't, but her specialty as an economist was labor economics. Okay, well, there's a place for that, but not as U.S. Treasury Secretary. You have to know she didn't know monetary policy of the Fed. She doesn't know fiscal policy of the Treasury. Knows nothing about international economics, and that gets us into the role of the dollar. She was like her husband won a Nobel Prize. Okay, George Akerlof. I know a lot of her close associates. If you don't want to say affirmative action, you can say the Peter Principle. Which, this goes back to the 60s, but the Peter Principle is you get in a bureaucracy and you do a good job and they give you a promotion. And then you keep doing a good job and they give you another promotion. And you keep doing a good job. And eventually you get promoted to something where you're incompetent. You're in over your head and you fail, but then you stay there because you're not getting another promotion. And so the result is bureaucracies are populated with incompetent people because they've all risen to their level of incompetence and have nowhere else to go. I would say she got there at the Fed, how she got another chance at Treasury, but that's the answer. But Lael Brainerd, I'll say, is more talented, and hopefully she'll be. So they'll throw Yellen under the bus, blame her. By the way, that's the Biden technique: deflection and denial and just blaming other people. So they'll blame her for the whole thing. She probably doesn't see that coming, by the way. Maybe she should tune into London Real. And then they'll put Lael Brainerd over there. But Mary Daly was on the short list to fill Brainerd's seat at the Fed. Well, you can forget that. She can't get to a hearing at this point. But she was running around on, climate change, social justice, George Floyd, BLM. And again, free country. You want to express a view, be my guest, but not as chief regulator of Silicon Valley Bank.